This is Andi Purewal, Boxing Social in association with Betfred. For the first time this year, I'm joined by Dan Rafael here in Las Vegas as well. Dan, firstly, how are you?
I'm doing very good. I just realized it is the first time this year because it's my. I have not been to that many fights. I was here last week for the Valdez-Shakur fight, but I didn't see you here for that, and I just stayed through the week. But it's good to see you. It's good to be back on Boxing Social.
Always good to have you on the channel, Dan. Obviously, the reason we're here and we've met up again in Las Vegas is because the pound-for-pound star Sal Canelo Alvarez makes his move up to light heavyweight to challenge WBA champion Bivol. Firstly, Dan, just your thoughts on this fight, and where do you rank the test and the challenge of Bivol compared to Canelo's past foes?
I think it's a really tough test. I mean, again, I say that believing that he'll win the fight, but by no means is this a walk in the park. Is this a walkover? I feel like it's a much more complicated fight than, say, when he went up to light heavyweight the first time to fight Kovalev, who was obviously at one time a tremendous pound-for-pound level fighter, great punching power, good skills. But by the time he fought Canelo, he was still good, but he had obviously degraded to a certain degree. And you saw what happened. He ended up getting knocked out almost cold by Canelo, and that was a great victory for him. But Bivol is in his prime. Bivol's still not 30 years old yet. He's, I think, 29, if I'm not mistaken. Undefeated, has a title, very confident, good amateur background. And although he doesn't have a glittering resume, he has some good wins on his record also. He's beaten like Joe Smith, who went on to become a world champion after that. He's beaten Sullivan Barrera, who was always giving guys tough fights, even if he was never a champion. So he has that experience. Bivol, it's a weird thing that I look at him and I see like he fights like the Salamov fight, for example. He fights the Craig Richard fight, for example. Kind of felt like he fought down to that opposition. Like he wasn't really like as excited for that fight. Still did the job, but there was just not as much commitment to the fight, let's say. Not as much emotion to the fight. This is different. Now you're fighting the pound-for-pound king. You know it. You're on the grandest stage. Las Vegas, big main event. Going to be a sold-out T-Mobile Arena. Going to be probably the biggest crowd he ever fought in front of by far. And I think it's got his juices flowing. Like he knows this is a career-making fight in terms of his legacy, certainly his bank account, but he's going to get that money win or lose. But should not be underestimated. He's a very, very good quality fighter.
When Canelo fights in Las Vegas, people kind of have this idea and they talk about how if he used to go to the cards, then it would favour Saul out here. Is that something Dimitri should be concerned of? Do we need to see him be more aggressive with Canelo so that if he is to go the distance, if he isn't to stop him, he's done more than enough convincingly to make sure he's winning those rounds? I
mean, you always want to do that. You don't want to leave it to the judges. Look, I've covered a lot of fights in Vegas with some weird scores, but it's not just Vegas. I've done it in other places also. And the judging panel, these are professionals. It's a quality panel. The names escape me at the moment, but I looked at it the other day when they picked them at the Nevada Commission meeting, where they picked the judges both for this card as well as the one that was last week with Stevenson and Valdez. That's always been sort of a talking point before these types of fights. Like, well, if it goes to the cards, he can get the decision. You know what? There have been times where cards were used in fights and the guy that was the ace side didn't get the decision. I mean, how many people thought that Oscar De La Hoya got ripped off against Felix Trinidad when he was the ace side? I mean, it happens. I've seen it go both ways. So I don't think if you're the fighter, you can really worry about yourself. You just got to prepare the best you can for the fight. Obviously, I love knockouts because it renders all that irrelevant. I'd like to think that if Dimitri Bivol wins the fight, then he's going to get the decision in the fight. I mean, I wouldn't stake my life on it, but that's what you have to go by. The judges, they're in control, and you hope that they have a good night.
Dan, this will obviously be Dazn's first pay-per-view show here in the US. We saw the Ryan Garcia fight in Canada was on pay-per-view, which didn't necessarily go down too well, even though it might not have reached many people out up there. But how do you expect it to be received? Obviously, there's a lot of critiques when the first thought of a Dazn pay-per-view started to come out because of when Dazn and Matchroom first teamed up. They said they had no intentions of going down that route, so now it's finally here. How do you anticipate it to go?
Well, not only did they say that they weren't going to go down the road, they loudly and forcefully promoted anti-pay-per-view. Their slogan was "Pay-per-view is dead," and I can specifically remember in front of the T-Mobile Arena, I believe it was when Canelo fought Daniel Jacobs. They had a tent set up. There's that big plaza in front of the arena, and they have like food trucks and beer trucks and merchandise stands, and they had a DAZN tent set up, and they literally were giving fans a sledgehammer, putting on the goggles and letting them smash a TV. In other words, pay-per-view is dead. Well, then they realize that you can't afford to do a 40 or a 50 or $60 million fight with a fighter of the level of popularity and financial demands of Canelo Alvarez if you're not on pay-per-view. And so that had to be done. It's unfortunate, but it's the world we live in. I always thought when they created the platform that there was no way they were going to be able to do what they said they would be able to do, which is deliver pay-per-view level fights at one subscription price. I know how to do basic math. I may not be a genius at math, but I can do basic math and run the numbers. There was no way they were going to be able to do pay-per-view level fights at the upper echelon without having to charge a surcharge. That's just the nature of the business. I mean, it's been going on for 30 years. It's not complicated. And so you hope that they stick to their word that it's not going to become a regular thing. Because if it becomes a regular thing, then they're just another platform. Why do I got to, it's just, they're no different than the Showtimes, the HBOs, than the other places, ESPN that does some pay-per-view. If they use it in a proper manner, and by that I mean the literal biggest events. And when I say that, I mean the super special Canelo fights, who's the number one guy who commands the biggest purses. Maybe if it was some mega heavyweight title fight, let's say it was Joshua Fury, let's say they had the rights to something like that. I get it. We don't get stuff for free. But if they start trying to do that with a regular Ryan Garcia fight or some other good fight, but not a mega fight, then there's going to be I think a lot more pushback. But I think that the consumers, at least in the United States, where pay-per-view has been part of our vernacular and part of the way we watch boxing for a very long time, since the late, since roughly 1991 or so, whenever George Foreman fought Evander Holyfield. We understand that, for the biggest fights, I don't think even people have a problem paying for that. It's when you serve them crap and you ask the $50, $60, $70 that they're going to push back. If they use it sporadically and they smartly target it for only a couple of times a year, they should be okay. If they try to do that on lesser fights, then it's going to be a problem.
Beyond this week, Dan, if Canelo's successful, there's all that talk about the Gennady Golovkin trilogy. On the back of a Murata fight, some people weren't necessarily as keen to see the trilogy bout beforehand. I mean, I think after seeing how much it slowed down, particularly in those early rounds, even less so. What's been your thoughts on the potential trilogy fight, especially having seen Triple G versus Murata?
Well, I mean, I thought that he looked good against Murata, like you said, after the first couple of rounds. But again, he'd been out of the ring for over a year, and Murata had been out of the ring for even longer than that. So, I have no problem. You're not going to necessarily come out blasting and win every single round convincingly right from the get-go. It does take guys a little bit of the time to get rolling. And once he got rolling, I mean, he was dominating against Murata. He scored a good knockout. It was a good fight to watch. If you're whether you're a fan of him or not, or you just want to see a good scrap, it was a good fight. And I think that maybe there are some people that are kind of tired of that, but I think in the end they got to close that chapter. It makes sense. There's a lot of people that want to see it. Certainly more people that want to see it that don't want to see it, and that's what's going to happen. As long as he beats Bivol, we're seeing that third fight. And you know what? When that fight rolls around, there's going to be a whole lot more people in this media center, and there's going to be a whole lot more international interest. There's going to be a whole lot more money flowing on that fight, and so I say bring it on.
All right, from Canelo, just get your thoughts on a few other topics. You mentioned you was here for Shakur Stevenson last week. Dan, does Shakur now rank on the pound-for-pound list?
Absolutely. He said beforehand that, somebody had said, well, you think you're on the pound-for-pound list. He says, no. I'm not on the pound-for-pound yet list. I don't put myself on the pound-for-pound list. But when I beat Oscar Valdez, I'm going to be on the pound-for-pound list. And you know what? He's right. He not only did he beat Oscar, he did it in very dominant fashion, in dominant fashion against a guy, by the way, in Valdez, who did not fight a bad fight. Just was beaten by a better guy that night. I mean, just the skills are obviously different. Shakur Stevenson, as James Prince, who was his manager, said after that to a few of us that were in the press conference afterwards, and he was he said it in like a real, if you know James, he's a real low-key kind of chill guy. He said it in such a manner that it was very understated. He's like, Shakur's going to be a problem for a lot of guys. No shit, he's going to be a problem for a lot of guys. He's going to be a problem for a lot of guys for a long time. He's a very, very good fighter. He does everything well. He's got good defense, obviously. He's got enough offense. He's got a good jab. And I have made the comment that when he turned pro at 18, 19 out of the Olympics, he was still physically not developed. He was still, not yet the man strength. He was still a boy in many ways. Now, having moved up from 26 to 130, he's now 24 years old, I guess. He's put on some muscle. he's not a knockout artist, but he can still do damage. I mean, you saw the way he destroyed Jamel Herring. He did drop Oscar Valdez in the fight. So while he's never going to be a guy that's going to roll through people in 1 or 2 rounds, you don't let him hit you in the face because it's going to hurt. So if you can add that part to your arsenal and you're still a premier defensive fighter and you still are very intelligent in the ring, I mean, it's a hard package to beat. And he is really something special. I've watched the young Mayweather. I watched Andre Ward's entire career, who he, was mentored by and used to manage him. Pick a pound-for-pound guy in the last 20-plus years. I've seen them. Shakur Stevenson is on that level.
Certainly high praise indeed, Dan. Just with Shakur and what could be next, what route do you expect him to go down? Do you expect to see him try to become undisputed at super featherweight, or I've seen some comments today about the potential Lomachenko fight has been bandied about on social media. Do you think he'd go and look for the Loma fight, or would he want to be undisputed beforehand?
He said in the lead-up as well as in the post-fight that his desire is to be undisputed. So he already has 2 of the belts. He was the WBO champion. He won the WBC title against Valdez. So what does that mean? It means he's got to fight the IBF champion, which is Kenichi Ogawa, or the WBA champion, which is Roger Gutierrez. Just on the day that we're taping this, Eddie Hearn announced that he has done a deal for Ogawa to defend the title against Joe Cordina. But that fight's in June. So, Shakur, if he comes back at the end of the year, if Ogawa wins or if Cordina wins, that guy might be there for Eddie to take a phone call from Top Rank to see if it's possible to make the match. Gutierrez is with Golden Boy, also fighting on DAZN. Again, a fight that would be probably doable on the ESPN platform, because Ogawa and even Cordina and Gutierrez, they're not these big household names. They don't command giant purses. They're not on the level. They're the B side. So my thought was, and I wrote this in the column, maybe that's where you got the thing about Lomachenko. I said, look, he wants to be undisputed. So at the very least, the promoter has should take a few minutes to make the phone calls to just at least check and see if these are makeable fights in a normal manner, and if they can be made, try to make the fight, get them the unification. If they're running around and they want stupid money and it's just not doable and there's a lot of nonsense, move on. And they have in-house a fight that may not be a unification fight, but is a really big fight, a really good fight, and a fight that they can make, and that's Lomachenko, who has said many, many times that for the right fight, for the right history, don't really talk about the money, because Loma's always been more about the legacy and the history than the dollars, even though he makes a lot of money when he fights, is that he could still come back down to 130. He's been a champion at 130. He's never a unified champion at 130. So the opportunity to fight Shakur and get 2 belts would probably be attractive to him, and he would be very well compensated. And there's also the possibility that, again, if the deal is right and he can't get the unification, maybe Shakur would be willing to fight Loma at 135 or a catchweight and still, do that fight and still be champion, win or lose, and still then pursue the unifications if they're not able to be made next. But, Loma's obviously in Ukraine doing his bit in terms of the territorial defense in the war with Russia, but I have to figure at some point he's going to fight again. To me, if you can't make the unifications for Shakur, even if you could, I still think just from a fan interest and from the money and from the event level, Loma fighting him is huge. And as I also speculated, again, down the road, these are hard fights to make. Him and Tank Davis is a gigantic fight, at lightweight, huge fight between Shakur and Davis. But again, that's, we gotta walk before we run.
That is one fight which I think everybody in boxing would love to see. That is one which, it certainly gets the mouth watering just thinking about it. But just away from Shakur, there's something else which we saw that you wrote about. I think was it yesterday? Anthony Joshua's network deal. We saw that you mentioned that he'd be teaming up with Sky moving forwards. I spoke to Eddie today. He denied that. He said that nothing was official or anything.
Right, and just so I didn't write that it was a done deal. I don't like to be, I'm a journalist, I'm a writer. Words count, words matter. I was very precise with what I wrote. And I try my damnedest and have for as long as I've been a journalist, which goes back even before I wrote about boxing, over 25 years as a journalist. And words are important. I was very specific. Poised to make the deal with Sky Sports. Point being is my understanding, and I just pull it out of the ether, out of thin air. I've talked to people involved in the situation, that he has decided that he's going to finalize a Sky deal. Could he change his mind? Of course he could. Could Tyson Fury change his mind and not retire? Yeah. But everything points towards he's going to do a new deal with Sky. And as I have made the point to others, in my knowledge of the type of mentality and the person that Anthony Joshua is, he is very much a creature of habit. He's had the same manager his entire career in Freddie. He's had the same promoter in his entire career in Eddie. He's been on Sky for his entire career, starting from his pro debut all the way through the most recent fight against Usyk. He had been with Rob McCracken for his entire career, and one of the reasons it was so hard when he made the switch, that he didn't. Maybe he'll still bring in a new trainer that is unknown to him, but at the moment he's working with Fernandez, who had been his assistant over the last several fights. That was sort of like a happy medium, not starting entirely over, but at least keeping somebody that's been part of the team. What does that tell you about the mentality? He's a creature of habit. He doesn't like change, and now going from Sky to DAZN would be change, and sometimes change is good. But in the case of Anthony Joshua, why fix what's not broken? I mean, he's had a wonderful relationship with Sky from day one. They've done great business with each other. They've both helped each other's career. He has relationships there that go back his entire career. And even though it's a little weird maybe for Eddie, that's not Anthony Joshua's problem. Eddie's got all his guys on DAZN now. They didn't redo their deal with Sky. But in the end, they're pros. You don't think that Eddie Hearn and his team can go and do one event with Sky Sports, or one or two events a year because of Joshua? They all know each other. They've worked together 1,000 times, and they'll handle it like pros. And he'll have good business still with DAZN. And by the way, it's not out of the realm that when they do the United States deal for Anthony Joshua's rights, that he could wind up on staying on DAZN in his U.S. rights. So. It really, what it's going to come down to is that it's basically just going to be status quo. It seems to me that he'll still have his fights in Britain on Sky, and the only thing that will be different that Eddie's other events are not on Sky. But again, until it's signed, it's not done, which is why I didn't write it was a done deal, because it's not a done deal. It's not signed, but that the opinion of those I spoke to, based on their knowledge of what Anthony was talking to them about and his team, was that they're going to redo a new deal for him to remain on Sky Sports.
Provided that does go ahead, then, Dan, and he does put his pen on the dotted line with Sky, how damaging do you believe that might be for DAZN in the UK not to have that superstar power, that draw that Anthony Joshua brings with him?
I mean, look, it would definitely it would sting. I can't imagine it wouldn't. I mean, you have all of the other Matchroom assets under your broadcast, and the biggest one you don't. Excuse me. That's they don't love that, I'm sure. But look, it's business. They're big boys, and they have plenty of others. They have Canelo here in America. They have got Triple G here in America. They've got plenty of other quality fighters that fight on DAZN. They have Ryan Garcia, who's a big subscriber driver in the United States, if you listen to what they say. So does it sting? Of course it does, but it's not the end of the world.
And then final one, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, again, we saw Tyson Fury stop Dillian White in the 6th round of their fight at Wembley. Do you think Tyson retires?
I've been asked that by a lot of people, and I've said many times, the answer is no. And it's not just because about Tyson Fury. It's because, in a long career of covering professional boxing, how many times have we seen guys announce retirements and come back? It's far more often that they come back than that they don't. And so while I'm not going to call Tyson Fury a liar, I think that when he says it's from the heart and he thinks he's done. He's going to go home and play with his kids and, go have a couple of beers with the boys and, do whatever, enjoy himself, go on a vacation, whatever the case may be. But at some point, he's going to wake up and be like, I feel like, he's going to get that itch that every athlete, every boxer gets usually. And, why stop now? Like, I'm not advocating for anybody to stay too long. And if he decides to retire, good for him. He's going to have a huge amount of money he'll never want for anything the rest of his life. He's got the love and the respect now of the Brits, which he didn't have before the recent fights, particularly with the homecoming. But it's just hard to believe that a man who has proclaimed on 1,000 occasions that he's a fighting man, that how much he loves boxing, how much he loves to train and go to camp, and what a great relationship he has with Sugar Hill Stewart, his trainer, and the whole team when they get together. To give that up, for why? You're still so good. You're still in your best. You still can make tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Set your family up for multiple generations. That it'd be a real shame. As I wrote in a piece, he doesn't owe it to me to fight on. He doesn't owe it to you. He doesn't owe it to the fans. He doesn't owe it to anybody. I think he owes it to himself to really put that final stamp as, he's the greatest of our time, but to the no doubt about to make it so we have to have the conversation of where he fits in the top 10 of all time, let's say, and to stop short when there's some fight out there that's a giant mega fight, which is the winner of Joshua Usyk, to me is one fight too soon. I know, as he said, they always say there's another fight. Who are you going to fight next? If he fights the winner of Usyk and Joshua, I personally promise never to say he doesn't have to fight anybody else. That's good. If he does that one fight, go and have a great life. But we need to see that fight. So I think that he believes it right now. I'm retired, and in a few months, or he watches the rematch and he sees and he starts to get the pressure and he starts to get the enticements of what we can do in terms of a deal, and he gets the desire to go to the gym and he misses the guys. He'll be back, I hope.
If he was to go down the retired route, Dan, just to kind of make everybody believe so, do you think there's going to be a cut-off point when he might have to vacate the WBC title?
Well, as I said the other day, and I got a lot of, as you guys in Britain like to say, I got a lot of stick. I said if he's truly retired, good for him. I'm happy for him. He's got a huge amount of money and a wonderful family and a lot of accomplishments. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame and all that kind of stuff. But if you're truly retired, vacate the title and give the other guys a shot. When Lennox Lewis decided to retire, now he didn't retire in the ring after his Klitschko fight. It took him a few months to decide what he wanted to do. He took his time, went through the process, and when he finally decided to have a press conference and announce his official retirement, at that same moment he abdicated the WBC title. That's what a true pro does. If you're going to retire, why hold it hostage? There's other, and if anybody, other fighters understand that those opportunities are hard to come by, you'd think he'd want to say, what, I've done my time. I've been the great champion that I am, and I'm stepping aside and, let these other guys go at it and vacate the title. Now, I wouldn't say this if he was hemming and hawing, if he wasn't sure, because the fight just happened. Give him a couple of months, no problem. But he's the one that said, I'm done. If you're really done, give up the title.
Right, Dan, we will leave that there now. Leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening as time is getting on. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you the first time this year, as we said earlier. So thank you for speaking to me and Boxing Social.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.